Moving into my new house was supposed to be a fresh start. I had finally found a place with a private driveway, something I had always wanted after years of dealing with crowded street parking. It was clearly marked, large enough for 2 cars, and, most importantly, mine. Or at least, that's what I thought until I met my nightmare neighbor, Tom. Tom was the kind of guy who thought rules didn't apply to him. From the moment I moved in, I noticed he had a habit of treating my driveway like his personal parking space. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just confused about the property lines. Maybe it was a one-time thing. But it wasn't. Every day, he would park partially in my driveway, sometimes blocking half of it, other times completely cutting off access to my garage. The first time it happened, I knocked on his door, trying to be friendly. "Hey, Tom, I think you might have accidentally parked a little too close to my driveway. Would you mind moving your car?" I expected a quick apology, maybe even some neighborly small talk. What I got instead was pure arrogance. Tom barely glanced at me before shrugging. "Oh, yeah. It's just for a little bit. Don't worry about it." Then he shut the door in my face. At first, I tried to be patient. Maybe he just didn't realize how often he was doing it. So I started keeping track, taking pictures every time his car encroached further into my space. I even tried talking to him again, but he always had the same dismissive response, "It's not a big deal." But then, things escalated. One morning, I was running late for work, and when I stepped outside, my driveway was completely blocked. Tom's car wasn't just a little over the line this time, it was parked directly across my driveway, blocking my garage. I pounded on his door, furious. No answer. I tried calling his phone, straight to voicemail. The only way I could leave was by taking an Uber, leaving my own car trapped behind his. That was the moment I realized Tom didn't just park like this out of carelessness, he did it because he didn't think I could stop him. He thought he owned the street. But he was about to learn the hard way that I knew my rights. Tom had no idea what was coming next. After being trapped in my own driveway, I spent the rest of the day seething. I knew that talking to Tom wouldn't work, and I wasn't about to let him keep walking all over me. If he wanted to play games, I was ready to play too. That night, I went through my city's parking and property laws, determined to find a solution. It didn't take long to discover that my rights were crystal clear. In my area, blocking a private driveway was illegal, and homeowners had the full legal right to have unauthorized vehicles towed at the owner's expense. I didn't waste any time. The next morning, when I woke up and saw Tom's car blocking my driveway again, I calmly walked back inside, picked up my phone, and called a tow truck. 20 minutes later, a heavy-duty tow truck pulled up in front of my house. I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee as the driver hooked up Tom's car and started lifting it off the ground. Right on cue, Tom came sprinting out of his house, still in his bathrobe and slippers, yelling like a madman. "What the hell are you doing? You can't tow my car." I smiled, holding out my phone. "Actually, I can. Blocking a private driveway is a towable offense. City Ordinance December 18th, 05. You can look it up if you want." Tom's face turned red. "You could have just asked me to move it." I crossed my arms. "I did. Twice. And you ignored me. So now, you can pick your car up at the impound lot." He looked at the tow truck driver, hoping for sympathy, but the guy just handed him a ticket with the tow yard address and fee. "You can pay the fine and get it back today," the driver said casually before pulling away with Tom's precious car in tow. Tom turned back to me, fuming. "You're gonna regret this," he spat before stomping back into his house. I knew he was mad, but I didn't care. I had followed the law to the letter, and if he thought one tow was enough to make him change his ways, he had another thing coming. Because the very next morning, his car was blocking my driveway again. And I had already saved the tow company's number. If Tom thought I was bluffing, he was in for a rude awakening. The very next morning, I walked outside to find his car once again parked right in front of my driveway, blocking me in as if yesterday's tow had never happened. I almost couldn't believe it. Was he really this stubborn? Apparently, he was. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my phone, dialed the same tow company, and within 20 minutes, another tow truck arrived. Just like before, they hooked up his car and started pulling it away. I watched with a smug sense of satisfaction, waiting to see how long it would take before Tom noticed. 10 minutes later, the front door burst open. Tom bolted out of his house, his face twisted in pure rage. "Are you kidding me?" he screamed as he ran toward the truck. "You're towing my car again?" I smiled. "You're blocking my driveway. Again." "You could have knocked," he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. I shook my head. "I don't have to. I gave you a warning yesterday. You decided to ignore it." The tow truck driver didn't even bother arguing with him this time. He just handed Tom another impound slip, climbed into the truck, and drove off with his car. Tom was fuming. He stomped up to me, invading my personal space, his face inches from mine. "You think you're funny?" he hissed. I didn't flinch. "No, but I think the law is," I replied smoothly. He clenched his fists, his whole body shaking with rage. "This isn't over." He stormed back inside, slamming his door so hard I thought the windows might shatter. At this point, a few neighbors had started paying attention. Some peeked through their blinds, while others openly watched from their porches. I even saw old Mr. Henderson from 2 doors down laughing into his coffee. The whole situation was already becoming neighborhood entertainment. But Tom? He wasn't entertained. The next morning, I came outside and, for the 3rd day in a row, his car was blocking my driveway. He actually did it again. I didn't even hesitate. I called the tow company, greeted the driver like an old friend, and watched the whole process unfold all over again. By the time Tom came outside and saw his car being taken for the 3rd time in 3 days, he looked on the verge of a meltdown. "You've got to be kidding me," he howled, kicking the ground. I shrugged. "You know, at this point, I think you just enjoy paying impound fees." His tantrum was even better than the last one. He threw his hands in the air, stomped around in circles, and screamed about how unfair it all was. But I didn't care. He had ignored me, blocked me in, and acted like I was powerless. Now, he was paying the price every single day. And I wasn't done yet. Because after the 3rd tow, the city got involved. And Tom? He was about to face consequences even worse than an impound lot fee. By the 3rd day in a row of having his car towed, Tom had officially lost his mind. His tantrums were getting more intense, his threats more ridiculous, and his rage was boiling over. But what he didn't realize was that his problems were about to get a whole lot worse. Because after 3 consecutive days of illegal parking violations, the city finally took notice. That afternoon, as I was sitting on my porch enjoying the show, I saw something beautiful, a parking enforcement officer pulling up right in front of Tom's house. Tom, who had just returned from retrieving his car yet again, immediately stormed outside, thinking he was going to get the chance to yell at me one more time. Instead, he came face to face with a uniformed city official holding a clipboard. "Thomas Reynolds?" the officer asked, glancing down at the documents in his hand. "Yeah, what?" Tom snapped, already irritated. The officer flipped through some papers. "You've received multiple citations for blocking a private driveway. You are now being issued an official municipal violation, and your vehicle has been flagged. Any further infractions will result in higher fines and possible suspension of your registration." Tom's mouth fell open. "Wait, what? You can't do that." The officer barely looked up. "Sir, you've had your car towed 3 times in 3 days. We can and we will. You are also being assessed escalating fines for repeated offenses, starting at $500 per violation. I'd suggest you start parking legally." I had to physically stop myself from laughing out loud. Tom exploded. "This is bull ***. He screamed, his face turning purple. "This is because of him." He jabbed a shaking finger in my direction. The officer finally looked up and turned toward me. "Sir," he said, addressing me directly, "do you own this property?" I nodded. "Yep. Title and deed in my name." "And did you request these tows legally?" I grinned. "Yep. All three of them." The officer simply nodded and turned back to Tom. "Then this is entirely your fault. If you park illegally again, we'll escalate the consequences further." He tore off a bright yellow violation slip and slapped it onto Tom's windshield. Tom looked like he was about to literally explode. You can't, this is insane," he screeched. The officer remained completely unfazed. "Have a great day, sir." Then he walked away, got in his car, and drove off. I sat back, sipping my lemonade as Tom stood there, completely defeated, staring at the expensive ticket on his windshield. He turned toward me, fists clenched, eyes burning with rage. "This is war," he snarled. I just smiled. "Buddy, you already lost." And he knew it. But Tom was too stubborn to admit defeat. He had one last move left, and he was about to make his biggest mistake yet. Tom had been beaten at every turn. He had ignored my warnings, gotten towed 3 times in 3 days, racked up hundreds in impound fees, and now had an official violation from the city threatening to escalate if he didn't stop blocking my driveway. But instead of accepting reality, he did what all entitled people do when they realize they're losing: he doubled down. The next morning, I expected him to finally park his car somewhere legal and let this whole thing go. Instead, I woke up to find something even more ridiculous than before. Tom hadn't just parked in front of my driveway. He had parked sideways, completely blocking the entrance, like a child throwing a tantrum in the middle of a grocery store aisle. I stared at the absolute insanity of it, almost impressed at his sheer level of pettiness. Did he seriously think this was going to work? I didn't even hesitate. I called the tow company like usual, but this time, I also called parking enforcement to report a deliberate obstruction. This wasn't just illegal parking anymore, this was intentional interference with private property. And that came with harsher consequences. The tow truck arrived, followed shortly by the same parking officer from the day before. As soon as Tom heard the commotion, he sprinted outside in nothing but his pajama pants and a rage-fueled expression. "OH, come on," he shrieked as he saw his car being hooked up again. The officer, who looked beyond done with Tom's nonsense, simply held up another violation slip. "Mr. Reynolds, you were warned. This is your 4th offense. As of today, your vehicle's registration is suspended pending review, and you are being issued a mandatory court summons for repeated traffic violations and obstruction of private property." Tom froze. "What?" The officer didn't even look up as he kept writing. "Additionally, due to your repeated infractions, your vehicle is now on the city's tow watch list. Any future violations will result in immediate impoundment, with no option for recovery until your fines are paid in full." Tom's face went completely white. He tried one last desperate move, turning to me, his voice cracking. "Dude, you can't do this. We're neighbors. Just tell them to stop." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So now you want to negotiate?" He swallowed hard. I get it, okay? I shouldn't have parked there. Just let me off the hook this time, alright?" I laughed. Actually laughed in his face. "Tom," I said, shaking my head. "You had so many chances to fix this. I asked you nicely, multiple times. You ignored me. I followed the law, and you still thought you could get away with it. Now, you're dealing with the consequences of your own actions." The tow truck driver gave me a nod before pulling away, taking Tom's precious car off to impound, again. As for Tom, he stood there completely broken, staring at the empty spot where his car had been. His shoulders slumped, his face pale, and for the first time, he looked like he truly understood what had happened. By the end of the week, Tom had stopped blocking my driveway completely. In fact, I noticed he started parking several streets over, just to avoid any more run-ins with the tow company or the city. Within 3 months, he put his house up for sale. And 6 months later, he was gone. I had legally towed him into oblivion, and he had nobody to blame but himself. As I sat on my porch, enjoying my completely unblocked driveway, I smiled, knowing that justice had been served. Some battles are fought with words, some with actions. But this was one with a tow truck.